Okay, welcome back. We're still talking about OS strategies. On page 143, they talk about cloning. So Norton Ghost was one of the ones that was kind of interesting. There's a free and open Ghost, basically the same thing. There's Clonezilla, which is essentially the same thing over again. And so the idea is to talk about pros and cons. Well, the pros and cons are there's no real configuration history. When I make a change to the master, unless you wrote it down somewhere, no one's really going to remember, oh, wait, did I get the new image or is this the old image? And you would have to have a separate image for every machine, unlike the automation version where you could just have an add-on for the accounting department. I would basically have to have an accounting image and an engineering image and a sales image, all those kinds of things. And then whenever you have a new operating system come out, let's say you're converting over from Windows 7 to Windows 10 or from 10 to 11, well, basically you basically just have to start over. I mean, there's no incremental thinking here. It's like wipe out the master machine and reload from scratch and then tweak it. Well, problem with that is probably the first time, the very, very first time you start with a brand new version of Windows 11, there's probably going to be some tweaks that you're missing, and so, kind of a main. So there is a way you can do automatic image creation. There's a thing called Packer or Vagrant, and you can build this master image and have some sort of a configuration file. Later on, we're going to be talking about how the Army did it. The Army has this thing called the Army Gold Master, and Army is big enough, right, that they can go to companies like Dell and HP and say, look, when we buy machines from you, we want you to pre-install our image. So they give them the Army Gold Master image, and so they apply it at the factory. So when they come to the Army installation, they take them out of the cardboard boxes and they're ready to go. That's pretty doggone cool. But you gotta, am I using Army AGM, Army Gold Master, 4.1, or is this 4.2? That kind of stuff. It could be a little confusing. Okay, and then a hybrid kind of scenario, which is you start with a baseline image and then you use some sort of automation to say, oh, this machine magically appeared in the accounting organizational unit. We haven't talked about that term, so if you don't know what that term is, don't worry about it. It magically appeared in here, therefore I'm going to install this software. Okay. Anyway, so half and half. The base of the machine gets installed manually or cloned, and then using Active Directory, it can push or install software. Okay, the manual technique is on page 145. So you boot off the media, DVD or a USB thumb drive of some sort, and you answer a few questions, right? What do you want to do here? What's your name? How do you want to set up the hard drive? That kind of stuff. So maybe you install Office, right? And maybe some other basic applications that you pretty much sure everyone would use, okay? And then, that's basically the way it works. And so if you had two different people doing this, the likelihood of you having them absolutely the same is going to be a little weird, huh? So perhaps you have limited bandwidth, and so you really can't do things over the network, and you really can't go get things off the network. So instead, what you basically do is you use some sort of a checklist. You go through and say, okay, answer this question with this, answer this question with this, on. And if everyone follows the checklist, then you get some semblance of consistency. I mean, it's not perfect, but basically, by the way, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do an install of VirtualBox and then an install of, Windows Server 2019. And it's going to be practically identical to what's going to be asked of you in assignment 2. Okay, just saying. Okay, so here's a question on page 146. If you're a small shop and you only got just a handful of people, do you really need to invest in automation? I mean, automation requires a little bit of money most of the time, some skills and some training, and maybe that's a bridge too far. So they talk about it as don't wait to investigate and experiment on these techniques, even if you know that right now there's no practical need to go to the automated technique. But there's two reasons why you think you probably ought to do that. One is a selfish reason, and that is you might get a job someplace else in a bigger organization, so it would be kind of handy if you knew this. And then the other reason is, your organization might grow, and finally you get to the point, instead of having, 10 employees or 40, you end up with 100, you go, ooh. And then you could go back and say, you know, we talked about this last year about, you know, we kind of experimented with this automation thing. So, yeah. So those are 2 good reasons why you should not wait to look at automating operating system install. Okay. So test-driven configuration. So on page 147. So the thing is, track everything. If you're building images and deploying them, you probably need some way to track who has what image. And then here's a scenario. Let's say that you've got, you know, you make every I don't know, every month or something. You tweak the master image a little bit. And then somebody comes to you and says, hey, you know, I'm having trouble with this this problem here. And the first thing you'd want to know is, what image number are you on? Are you on number 42? Because if you are, if I fix it on your machine, I need to go check to see if all the other ones that are the same image number 42, see if they need the fix as well. Okay? So that's what it's all about. You track what's going on. If you find something, you fix it, and then you document it and you move on. That's the whole point about this test-driven development. Let me give you an example of one that we did. Okay, so I have an image on my machine here, but I don't really know which one it is. You know, if it's version 42 or 43 or something like that. So we developed this cool little piece of software called, it's called Wallpaper. Okay, so I'm going to go to Wallpaper here, and I'm going to run this guy. And normally you would set this thing up so that it would run every single time you log in. And so over here in the corner now is all sorts of information, and this just stays on their background image. And so the users don't really much care. I mean, even if you had pictures of your, you know, your family here as your background image, this is kind of subdued. It's not very in your face. It's just kind of fade things over there. Okay, I zoomed in here a bit to see what this thing says. So it tells me all sorts of information. So let's say the user called up the help desk and said, hey man, I'm having some problems. Oh, what's your machine name? They're not going to know their machine name. They're not going to know any of that stuff. So here, it's got the machine name and whether or not it's a work group or a domain and what model it is, the serial number, you know, the user, comments, the current date and time, the IP address, all this stuff. And then down here is the installed date. This was installed 4/24/22. And the install rep, this is the image number. This is 10.2.4, and it was built on the 8th, okay? So that's the way this thing is designed to do. It provides all sorts of information. So now I know when somebody calls up and said, hey, I'm having trouble with this, you could say, ooh, well, maybe all the 10.2.4s are having this exact same problem. Okay, so test-driven development. Basically, it talks about 3 parts to this thing. One is describe the need. What is it you're trying to do? Because if you can't, if you can't figure out what the problem is, then any solution will work. So you need to know what the problem is. You have to have details of the change. I changed this because somebody called up and said, you know, I can't get this thing to work. And then you need to have some sort of a test to show that it was successful. So, you know, oops, I got a problem. Here's what I did, and here's how I tested to make sure it worked. Okay. You know, you shouldn't just like install a patch and go, well, okay, I'm done. You really need to test to see if the customer's complaint was actually solved. You know, don't just say, well, it copied the files. No, that's not the way that works. And then, of course, the documentation part. You know, basically, you have to design some sort of a test and then run the test before you install anything. And, of course, the test is going to fail because you haven't done anything yet. And then you do the fix, and then you run the test a second time, and it comes up and says, yep, it looks like it's fixed now. And so now that test-driven development kind of a thing allows you to say, I know for certain that the machines that have this particular image have been fixed. Okay, so I may have to go create me a new image or increment my image number here to make it go. Okay, so by the way, when you do this test-driven development kind of thing, you're testing 2 things. You're testing the fix. You're also testing your test, if that makes sense. Okay, regression testing. So this is, I fixed something new, but it broke something old. Regression testing means, you know, here's the scenario. Okay, it's time for me to make a fix to, I don't know, some print driver. And so I do that. And then somebody says, hey, you know, my little fax software doesn't work anymore. And you go, wait, I remember fixing that over a year ago. I wonder what happened. You know, it's an old problem that got fixed, but this new solution broke your old problem. Regression testing. Okay, what is the downside of this? Well, to tell you the truth, it's kind of time consuming. If it's a very, very, very simple tweak that you made to the system, I'm probably not going to do too much. I mean, particularly like it's the Microsoft fix, you know, I'm going to assume that they know what they're doing. I'm probably not going to document the heck out of that. I'm going to assume that there's a security problem. I don't know anything about it, but they seem to know. So, okay. So perhaps using test-driven would work only those things that you think are going to be kind of fragile or things that are important. Okay. So automating steps. On page 148, you know, remember the small batch principle? They don't recommend you go in and say, well, let's just automate everything during the operating system install. No, you just take it small, take it slow, take it easy. So, you know, maybe start with a pixie boot to a naked ISO file, okay, with no tweaks to it whatsoever. You know, basically it's still a manual process, really. The only thing different is instead of you physically putting a file, you know, the CD in the CD tray and pushing the button, you put the ISO file on a server somewhere, and when you boot it up, it does a pixie boot over the network and goes and grabs the thing. I mean, other than that, everything else is the same. You're still going to have a monitor plugged in. You're still going to have a keyboard and a mouse to be able to finish the install, just like a manual. So all you did is just take one tiny little step towards automation. That's good. Okay, and then you could use a pre-built image, right? Now that you got the ISO, with a thing called an answer file. You think, what the heck? Well, the answer file is just a text file, and you don't have to build this thing by hand. There's a little system that does it. You can turn on this thing, and it'll watch you as you do the install. You know, every mouse click you made and every answer you put in, it records it all. So at the end, it says, okay, I have this thing called an answer file. And so when you point it to the install media and to the answer file, now it won't ask you anything at all. So you don't actually have to have a keyboard and mouse installed anymore. See how the automation kind of makes this cool? In a perfect automation world, you take the CPU out of the box. You do not hook up a monitor. You do not hook up a mouse. You do not hook up a keyboard. All you hook up is a power cord and the network card, and that's it. Nothing else. Okay? That's the perfect world. Okay. So yes, if you did a pre-built image, you can have other things, you know, like Microsoft Office. And the whole idea is that the prompts, you want the prompts to go away, because if the prompts come up, the install just stops, right? And that means I have to physically be there, and I don't want to do that. I want push a button and walk away. How many times have I said that? Push a button and walk away. I don't want to have to stand there and wait. Okay, this one's ready. I'll have to hit the OK button. Okay, that's what the answer files does for you. It replaces your finger. Okay. So they talk about start using it before it's completely automated. Go ahead and do, you know, incremental development. Try starting off with just a naked ISO, then maybe add, you know, Microsoft Office to it, you know, just a few more little tweaks. And then test your process. Give lots and lots of documentation. And here's one way that it's, I do this a lot back when I was doing this for a living. We'd have like a junior person coming on board. I go, great. We're going to give you a set of instructions on how to do a restore operation. Or we're going to give you a set of instructions on how to do an operating system install. And then just turn them loose. You don't give them anything more other than the set of instructions. Now this is going to tell me two things. It's going to tell me, do you have a decent employee? And second, it's going to tell you if your documentation sucks. Because they're going to come back and say, what on earth does this mean? You go, oh, yeah, it's a little strange. Okay, let me go fix that. All right, so that's an excellent way of testing out your procedures. Okay, once again, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark.